We're really pleased to be able to introduce this resource to you, mapping our curricula, and looking forward to sort of exploring it with you and giving you as well opportunity to talk with each other about it. I'm just going to hand over to Emily, who's our CEO, so that she can speak to you to begin with and welcome you.
Thank you, Faye, and absolutely delighted to see so many of you here today and some familiar faces as well. I've been with Mindfulness in Schools project just over a year, and each time we have one of these events, I'm so pleased to see that I'm beginning to meet some of you, albeit virtually. And also a special welcome to anybody new that's joining us. Today, we are really excited to be able to share with you the work that's taken place to map and explore the relationship between the Mindfulness in Schools project curricula and PSHE education, personal, social and health education. We're delighted to do that as part of our offer to support our trained teachers, and we're also delighted to offer this because we think, and hopefully with your help, that this will be a fantastic hook to bring in new teachers, new schools. And so if there's anybody new here today that's not been part of our courses or any of these events today, a special welcome for you too. We will have opportunities to hear from those, our colleagues who have developed this resource, and we know that there's a lot of expertise in this room from all of you as well, so we'll absolutely make sure that we have time for you to come together in a breakout room and hear from you. We know that the development of this piece of work, looking at the mapping of PSHE in England, could be potentially just the beginning, because we are having very fruitful discussions about what this could look like in Wales, as well as the other devolved nations, as well as more globally. If you like what you see today, and I know these are difficult times for many charities and many of you, we're all going through quite a lot of change, I would say, as a nation and on the planet. But MiSP relies on donations and also word of mouth. So the more courses that we can sell, the more interest that we can gather, the more this work can be sustained. So there is a request, no obligation, but if you like what you see today, if you'd like to see more of what we're doing, could I ask each and everyone to make one small commitment? And that can be either sharing what you hear today about the PSHE mapping with a teacher that is new to this work, or to a school that's new to this work, or, and my colleague will put up a little link, and again, there's no pressure on this because I know we're all going through difficult times, and this is part of our offer to our trained teacher community. But if you'd like to help MiSP, there'll be a link where you can make a small donation. And the other way of helping, and we'll share details of this at the end, so we don't want to overwhelm you at this stage, is we have some funding to get our courses out, particularly to primary schools, nurseries, at really subsidised rates. But we probably need your help to reach schools in areas with higher than average free school meals. So I hope that gives you a range of ways that you can support if you want to, because we're definitely really excited about all the things that this mapping work could lead to, as well as other initiatives. Just to say also, in terms of some housekeeping, if at all possible, it'd be great if you can keep your cameras on. I know that's not always possible if there are things going on in the background, but it is really lovely to see everybody's faces. There will be times when we're invited to use chat, but otherwise we'll be switching that off so that it's less distracting. take care of yourself during this session, stand, stretch, do whatever you need to do. And we are scheduled to, we're scheduled to finish at 5:30, but there will be a slot if there's more discussion, and an optional slot until 6 o'clock. So I think that's everything that I wanted to say, apart from, again, just how wonderful it is to actually see so many of you in the UK and beyond. And Faye, Annabelle, I'm sure everybody would really like to hear from you guys who've actually developed this work. So over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Okay, so we're going to get started then, and I think probably the best way to get started is to just let you know a little bit about us. So I'm going to hand over to Annabelle first to just introduce herself and give us a little bit about her background.
Hi everybody. So my name is Annabelle Talbot, and I started out as a primary school teacher. And then spent 30 years as advisor for personal, social and health education for Cambridgeshire. That involved me in leading on the writing of Cambridgeshire Primary Personal Development Programme, which is a very extensive scheme of work with policies and guidance and everything in it. I also supported Cambridgeshire schools with the Healthy Schools programme and led Cambridgeshire on the SEAL programme, and also was the Cambridgeshire lead for Student Voice for many years and wrote programmes for QCA, so kind of steeped in PSHE. And then the last 6 years I've been teaching children and adults mindfulness, including trained to teach DOTS and PSHE, which I'm teaching at the moment in a local school. And love doing. So that's me, where I come from.
Thanks, Annabelle. So I'm Faye Rushton. Some of you might have seen me as I work as a trainer for the Mindfulness in Schools project, and I have done since 2015. I started out as a secondary drama teacher though, and I was working based in school until a few years ago. And so I have experience of delivering mindfulness courses in school, but also peripatetically as an external teacher, and I deliver all of the MiSP Curricula. But I was also involved in the Healthy Minds project, which was a piece of research that was done sort of 2014 upwards, where they were exploring, what makes good PSHE teaching with wellbeing at the heart. So that's my background. So I'm going to move us now into just having a little talk about kind of why we decided to do this piece of work. And Annabelle and I were talking about it earlier, and the fact that often when we talk to senior leaders or we're on training, we'll encourage people to think about popping it into PSHE sort of curriculum time. So that's kind of a really regular thing. And for myself, that's where I was delivering it when I was working in school. And so that's kind of where we both feel it's natural places. But then we thought, well, that needs a little bit more of a sort of explore, or a little dig into that to kind of find out a bit more about where the crossovers are, where the links are between mindfulness and PSHE. Plus, we were having lots and lots of people who had trained with us, talking about kind of the links and would this be possible, to do this piece of work where we explore it in a bit more depth. So that's kind of where that came from. Also, we really want to support teachers who've trained with us in thinking about how they can talk to senior leaders in schools that they go to, if they're an external teacher, or if they're based in school, how they talk to their leadership about where mindfulness might complement a PSHE curriculum and vice versa. So that's kind of where all the motivation came for this piece of work. And we got the go-ahead from the trustees and also from Emily and the team, and we're able to kind of move forward with that earlier this year. So if I pass over to Annabelle now, she's just going to explain a little bit about how this then developed.
Thanks, Faye. So this was a very kind of organic emerging process. I think well, first of all, I want to thank Faye for her vision in thinking it might be possible, and also for very much working alongside me throughout it. It's a real piece of partnership working, I'd describe it as. And I think probably naively, even I thought that I could just pick up 2 bits of paper and cross-match them. And it turned out to be a lot more complex and subtle from that. So we started with the DFE statutory guidance, because I think, again, it adds to the kind of advocacy for mindfulness to be able to say it meets some parts of statutory curriculum. I think that's helpful too. And also took the PSHE Association programs of study, which are a bit broader in a sense, a bit wider. And I just literally went through them first of all and with a highlighter pen and highlighted where I thought there might be links. And initially it looked as if the links, the direct links were not that plentiful, partly because the learning intentions and objectives differ slightly, and some of the language. So I had to sort of dig a bit deeper in a way and look a bit more subtly. So ended up using 2 colours, and you'll see these when we come to the maps themselves later on, that using 1 colour, I think it was green, we used for very direct links, and then a sort of purple or pink colour for where there's an indirect link, or there might be an opportunity for linking, which might not be obvious when you first look at it. So went through both of those. In fact, had to go back and do that several times because Faye and then Eleanor joined in later as well, were sort of asking certain questions or seeing certain possibilities that I might not have seen the first time. So that was a very much a process where we went over and revised the thinking over and over. And then we looked at the layout, and even that was challenging, deciding which way to lay it out, whether to start with the statutory requirements or whether to start with the MiSP Curricula, and decided that the MiSP Curricula should be right up the front. So that sort of came first. And then alongside that, we matched the DFE statements, the PSHE Association statements. And we also realised very early on that it was going to need some explanation, some sort of exploration, some opportunities. So there's a column which you'll see later called Notes and Opportunities, which kind of explains the thinking, because you could look and say, why is that linking with that? And we felt it was quite important to explain where the opportunities might be. And also the introduction, and we're going to keep emphasizing really this afternoon how important the introduction and the introductory information is, because it needs to sit in a context, and it only really works if it's working in that context. So that was organic as well and sort of grew right from the beginning. It wasn't something we either added just at the beginning or at the end. We were very lucky to have some support from Catherine Weir as well, from the Mindfulness Initiative, and helping us to link it into their strategy for education. And particularly to help it to sit within a whole school approach and a whole school context, because all of us involved in mindfulness know if it's just like a slot on the curriculum once a week for half an hour or something, it is going to have some impact, but the impact will be greater if it's backed up by a whole school approach to well-being that the whole school community is involved in. And the linking to what's referred to in the Mindfulness Initiative as social and emotional learning, that happens not just in lessons but throughout the school day, felt really central to us. So we've emphasised that, and have also included the core mechanisms from that document, which again you'll see later, but they're very important as a context. I think that's probably all I need to say about the process for now. Faye, unless you want to add anything.
No, I think you've covered that quite comprehensively. So where we're going to move now is into just giving you a little bit of background, mindfulness in schools, if you're brand new to us, and then also taking you into some of the key features of the guidance document before giving you a little bit of a tour of the online resources. Okay, so let me just share my screen with you. Okay, so on training, I ask people to just give me a little thumbs up if they can see that. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so clearly, you know, the title is, you know, looking at this relationship. And I think that's the key thing to say there, is that there is a relationship between these two, that it's not just a case of, you know, that knocks out the need to teach this, etc. Though there can be a little bit of that, but it's looking at how can we make the most of PSHE working with mindfulness, and vice versa. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background to Mindfulness in Schools project, just in case you are brand new to us. MiSP is a UK-based charity, but does work, you know, with people internationally and supporting bringing mindfulness into schools. They have been developing school-based curricula now for over 12 years. Initially, it was for working with young people, but then we then brought in curricula that was for supporting adults as well. And that's a really kind of key message really in all of the work that we do, is this sense that we're not just looking at how we support young people with mindfulness, but also those who care for them. And you're probably aware that there's research that evidences that there's a well-being connection between, you know, how sort of the well-being of staff impacts young people and vice versa. So it's kind of, you know, a catch-22 really. If you can kind of get it working in one area, it then begins to have an impact on the other, and kind of works in the opposite way as well. So that's kind of a really key feature of this work. Over 6,000 teachers have trained. Do you know, every time I do this, I think actually I know it's many, many more, because I know that this slide was created a year or so ago. Over 618,000 students reached. And just to give you a little bit of I'm not going to spend too long on the curricula, but just so that you have awareness of what the different curricula are. .Begin is our version of an 8-week course that's delivered online by an adult mindfulness teacher. So all the sessions are live, and I can see from having a look at some of the lovely people who are here today that some of you have been on our .begin courses. I'll show you later, there is an in-person version of this course as well. .breathe is a transitions curricula aimed at 9 to 14-year-olds. DOTS is our most recent curricula that's been developed, that's for 3 to 6-year-olds. And I was lucky enough to pilot this and had lots and lots of fun working with early years with this particular curricula. And then PSHE is our Key Stage 2 curricula for 7 to 11-year-olds. .B is for 11 to 18-year-olds, and this was the very first one that I trained to teach and had amazing impact in the school that I worked in. And .B Foundations is the in-person version of the .begin course, and this course can be delivered by adult mindfulness teachers, and we're currently discussing when the next training for this might be. But it's on its way for those of you that are adult mindfulness teachers that would like to train in that. And then our school mindfulness lead is aimed very specifically at people who are based in school, who are interested in offering this training to adults, so .B Foundations it would be, in order to create some sustainability around the mindfulness offer in the school that you're in. We know that for mindfulness to land well, it's important that everybody has the same language when they're talking about it, and a clear understanding about what mindfulness is and what it's not. And training teachers, of course, then gives the possibility, because the .begin and the .B Foundations is the foundational course, gives the possibility for those teachers to then go on and train to teach to young people as well. So it's a kind of trying to create a sustainable model based in school. So let me just take you into the guidance document then. Annabelle mentioned about the fact that it became crucial, and it really did, because we realised that context was needed to make the maps make sense. So I would really recommend, it's kind of on the landing page for the maps on the website, but there's also a PDF document that you can download and print off as well. So I'd really recommend that you have a good read of that. But we're going to take you through the main features from this document. So here's the intention then for this piece of work: exploring where the opportunities are for linking and enhancing teaching and learning in schools, where there is a commitment to delivering mindfulness and PSHE. And if you're here and you're a PSHE lead, and actually mindfulness is not yet happening in your school, I'm just hoping that actually this presentation will give you a sense of how they could work together. And vice versa, you know, if you're a mindfulness teacher and you're thinking, how do I speak to schools about where it might sit with PSHE, the hope is that, you know, this will help you with that. So this is the PSHE Association definition of PSHE, and I'll just let you have a little read of that quote there.
Faye, can I just add something here that this is explored in the introduction as well, that we have gone with using the terminology PSHE, although we recognise that there are many different ways that this is kind of encapsulated in schools. And indeed, the DFE guidance is now sometimes being referred to as RSHE.
Yeah.
But particularly, I think for mindfulness, the personal and social bit's really important. So I think we wanted to keep hold of that terminology.
Yeah, thanks for saying that there. That's important. Yeah. So I'll move on to the next slide so you can see kind of where we think that mindfulness supports that particular definition of PSHE or RSHE, or other of the home countries referred to it as personal development. So I'm going to pop all of those up together, and I don't know if you want to speak to that first, Annabelle.
Yeah, so we really wanted to show what we felt the added value was of mindfulness in addition to PSHE or vice versa, that it can kind of enhance children's opportunities, children's development, children's well-being. There's a traditional model of delivery in PSHE, which is called the knowledge, skills and attitudes triangle, which is literally a triangle which addresses all of those. And it says actually PSHE teaching is not going to be effective if it doesn't address all three of those. And people have very often found it difficult to address the attitudes, qualities, behaviours part of that triangle. The knowledge and skills bit kind of can come more easily. So teachers would often say to me, oh, they can give me all the right answers, but they don't carry it out in practice. And I think as well as the knowledge and skills, mindfulness has a real contribution to make to that children, young people's awareness of what's happening for them and awareness of what's going on inside them, and then their ability to make choices around that. So I think that's really valuable. And also I sort of became aware over all the years I've written PSHE materials and trained schools in PSHE that a lot of it has been about helping children and young people to be happy, to be able to sort things out, to be able to fix things, or for somebody else to fix things for them. And all of that is important. But for me, what mindfulness brought was that ability also to be able to be with things when they're difficult sometimes, and to be able to recognize that things are not permanent and may shift and change. And yeah, just that extra dimension of sort of resilience in a way that we all believe is important for children and young people, but it doesn't necessarily just come from knowing the facts and the information.
Yeah, thank you.
We also wanted to emphasize here, Faye, didn't we, the importance of staff training. So
yeah, absolutely. There was something about I mean, some of the healthy minds research that came out was exploring sort of good quality teacher training for PSHE and how important that was. And one of the things that we feel that mindfulness gives is definitely quality teacher training for mindfulness teachers. So there's something about the qualities of that then can contribute to and enhance PSHE teaching if you have someone who's able to do both. The other thing to say here is one of the things that I think is really useful to think about is just the capacity as well of mindfulness teachers sort of teaching this to be walking their talk. We know a little bit from the mirror neuroscience, though of course that's always changing. So just a little caveat there to the fact that I recognise that. Is just that, you know, children imitate adults when they're learning. So it's more important, you know, how we are with children than what we say. And so if you know, within sort of like developing a mindfulness practice, the encouragement is to embody to walk our talk in the way that we are with young people and children. And hopefully that will be beneficial in terms of them learning. If there's that sense of them imitating, or, you know, kind of like leaning into the way that we are and the way that we relate to them. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Annabelle, before I move on? No. Okay. So there are some things, weren't there, that popped up that were really sort of like key points, things to consider in relation to the guidance.
Yeah, do you want me to say something about that? Yeah, so I think we completely recognise the pressure on schools and staff in schools in terms of curriculum time, that we are always looking for ways to make up curriculum time to fit more in, etc. And it would be, you know, I recognise a sort of wish to be able to sort of say that by covering this, we don't need to cover something else somewhere else, etc. And there may be places where that, I hope there are places where that applies, but we realized very quickly that it couldn't just be a content checklist. You can't, you know, we couldn't just tick things off and say, by doing this, we're doing this, etc. So it's much more nuanced than that. And it's about enabling the two areas to enrich each other, to complement each other, rather than to substitute for each other. I think that's quite an important sort of baseline that we established.
And then the second point here.
Yeah, so we've said this already, but there are a range of, in fact, we'll come back to this later, don't we, whole school approaches in this area. And again, it isn't about an either or, it's about how they all, including mindfulness, support each other and enrich each other. And it's that thing about social and emotional learning that goes on throughout the school day and throughout the whole school community, in your work with parents and carers, in playtimes and lunchtimes, in you know, how we do assemblies, you know, it's there throughout. And I would argue that for PSHE as well, that should be happening throughout the school day too, just like mindfulness.
Yeah. I always think that we sort of miss a trick really if mindfulness is just contained to being delivered as a curricula, and the same with PSHE, that actually we want to encourage, you know, that kind of applied learning. So there's that sense of, you know, how do teachers deal with young people when they come off the playground and they've had an argument, and, you know, there's this sense of just putting into practice what we're teaching in both of those subject areas that can kind of really help with young people and children understanding what we really mean by it. So yeah, that real sense of living it. Yeah,
and it's the reason why I used to say to schools where quite often in our area, PSHE would be given to the PPA cover person in primary schools to deliver in PPA time. And I understand the reasons for that. And also that those people can be very skilled at teaching that sort of area. But if the person who's with children and young people the rest of the time is not there, it's very difficult to help them apply the learning. You know, and the same with mindfulness. You want them to be applying what they're learning the rest of the week, the rest of the day, and not just in those sessions.
Yeah, we have to sort of like say that we understand the practical problems with all of that. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to just explore now a little bit about the kind of very direct links and the less direct links that pop up. And this is one of the strongest, I suppose, in terms of kind of the crossover between mindfulness and PSHE.
So yeah, so it was very good news that quite late on in the process of developing the statutory curriculum, that it was decided to add health education, including mental well-being, as they called it. I'm not sure about that term, but mental well-being was deemed to be really important to make statutory, and there was quite a big campaign around that. And it's good that it's in there, but there's quite a lot, it's quite scant in a way. So, and what's in there is good. So it talks about recognizing and naming emotions, and then moves very quickly to talking to somebody about it and getting support, all of which we'd all agree is really important. But I guess for me, what mindfulness adds is that enabling children and young people to develop their own strategies and approaches for supporting their mental health and well-being, managing their emotions, etc. And again, a good PSHE program would have a lot of that in it, but there's a particular, I think mindfulness makes a really strong contribution there, about empowering young people to feel that, as well as getting support, they have some strategies that they can use for themselves too.
Yeah. And I was just having a little look just then at that sort of second description there about sort of that understanding about how daily actions can affect people's mental health, and you know how that's really strongly woven through naturally all of the mindfulness curricula for young people that we offer, and is such a key part of mindfulness learning. And just so important in terms of that understanding, you know, of kind of consequence, I suppose, of, you know, what we choose to do every day really has an impact on how our lives are. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. So these were the indirect links, and this is kind of very specifically the sort of subject areas that pop up in PSHE in particular.
Yeah, so again, when I did that first trawl of the guidance with the highlighter pen, there were some really big areas where there were gaps in terms of the PSHE curriculum not appearing in mindfulness curricula. And then we realised through discussion that there were lots of opportunities to bring those in, particularly as a context for some of the teaching. So, I mean, one example I use is online safety. You know, it's not that in mindfulness we directly teach about online safety, but for example, when we're teaching about the amygdala and the signals that we get when we feel uncomfortable or unsafe, there would be a real opportunity to draw in, for example, when we're working on screen and something upsets us, or you know, something just makes us feel uncomfortable, just you know, looking at those feelings and being with those feelings and noticing them, and what we can do about them. So yeah, sometimes it might be about bringing your mindfulness teaching into your PSHE teaching, as well as the other way around, and as well as teaching them in a combined way. So it might be that you're teaching, say, about loss and change, and there are real opportunities to bring in some of that emotional awareness and how we handle those emotions, etc.
Mm-hmm. And you know, just the emotional awareness, emotional literacy, a sense of regulation of emotions, of course, really supports a lot of those subject areas as well. I was thinking about how key they are, especially to relationship building. And so there's a real opportunity there to kind of discuss how that could, I'm reluctant to call them mindfulness skills, but kind of mindfulness skills, you know, can kind of support children and young people with relationship building.
Of course, the risk there that we found a little bit is that once you go down that sort of approach, you could link everything. And we could have just listed almost everything in a PSHE curriculum in certain sections on mindfulness. So you're going to talk about choice making later. Well, choice making appears in everything that is in that list that you're seeing there. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, it's kind of, you know, if the practice is how do we support ourselves in our lives, then all of these things are going to be there, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, not for everybody, but elements of it. So indirect links then, so this is exploring more kind of the a more sort of broader brushstroke really, in looking at the nature of mindfulness teaching and how that might support PSHE, but also something there as well about teacher embodiment.
Yeah, so you talked a bit, didn't you, about the value of inquiry here, that the way that we as mindfulness teachers approach children's responses to questions. And in PSHE, obviously, there is some factual information, and some of it that children give us might be correct or incorrect, but how we respond to that and encouraging that kind of open-ended curiosity and friendly response makes a difference for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something, there's something about the kind of no rights or wrongs, and you know, the sense of I suppose non-judgment from a teacher as well, and kind of evenly holding everything that comes back from young people. That almost gives permission, I think, for young people to go a little bit further or explore a bit more, even if it's not something they articulate, it's something that they're perhaps doing themselves in the way that they practice. So yeah.
I guess the fact of PSHE or aspects of it becoming statutory is generally good news. One of the challenges is, because it then has to be assessed, it can go down this kind of tick list and knowledge kind of based approach, which kind of works against sometimes what we're trying to do in that facilitation.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's really valuing process more than outcome, but of course that's not necessarily how, you know, the system is and the way that it works. Yeah, at the moment anyway.
We also mentioned earlier that, for example, in my team, somebody developed a program called Safer Corridors for secondary schools, which was about a recognition that about climate, really, that for young people to be able to open up in their discussions and talk honestly about their experiences, they need to feel safe in the classroom. So that was a program that helped teachers to work through that almost before they taught any of these kind of sensitive areas. So that kind of applies to mindfulness teaching too. The climate of the classroom and how safe young people feel with each other in the building, with the staff, etc., is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Really key to kind of look at how that might sort of like work together and complement each other. Just to say, Jacqueline, I can see that your hand's up, but we're going to take questions later, or have feedback and opportunity for discussion later. I hope that's okay to maybe just jot down whatever the question is that you have at the moment, and we'll come back to that. Thank you. Okay, so these are kind of the focus or the themes that we explore when we're learning mindfulness, and that kind of like they're indirect because they're not like named in a PSHE curriculum, but it was interesting in our discussions to see how they support actually PSHE learning. Yeah,
and I was quite surprised to see some of those weren't actually in PS, you know, something like awareness of our thoughts and our thinking patterns and things isn't really made explicit in those programs at all, but there certainly would be opportunities to bring that into that learning and vice versa. And similarly, learning about the brain and the neuroscience, and I mentioned that example of the amygdala earlier, certainly in things like safeguarding and areas like relationship building or challenges in relationships, you know, some of that brain and neuroscience would fit really comfortably.
I think I mentioned this to a few people, so forgive me, any of you that I've told this story to, if I'm repeating myself. But just think it's really useful. When we were doing the Healthy Minds research in school, we taught the resiliency programme first, which was encouraging young people to notice their thinking style and whether or not it was supportive and helpful for them, the way that they were thinking about things. And we noticed, this was an 18-week programme, and we noticed that they struggled to identify their thoughts. And then they did .breathe following that particular programme. And we were like, oh, if only they'd had .breathe first, you know, and then they'd had to go at the PEM resiliency programme. They would have had that kind of cultivation of awareness of thinking, which comes through practicing mindfulness. And so then the following year, with the cohort that weren't part of the research group, we did it the other way around. We found that it was really beneficial for young people to learn mindfulness before they learn, you know, resiliency or anything where they have that sort of awareness of thinking. So yeah, metacognition is kind of key. And you think about how helpful that is in all sorts of ways, like you were saying, Annabelle, in all of those different subjects kind of areas in terms of helping young people with seeing things more clearly, you know, that ability to kind of step back and also get perspective on challenging situations. So the further opportunities then for linking PSHE and mindfulness lessons, I've flashed up here. Some of you might recognise pause B there, and it's lesson 2, making choices. And we were talking before about how choice making is such a key feature of kind of mindfulness training, but also how it really sort of feeds into PSHE as well. But if you want to talk more about some of those subject areas, Annabelle.
I think it kind of comes up later. I think it probably explains itself that healthy lifestyles teaching, again, if we just took it from what's the statutory curriculum, it's just around kind of physical activity and knowledge about healthy eating and things, but actually with mindfulness as an opportunity to build it into much more of a lifestyle thing, and looking at patterns of your life and relationships and things and different conditions for choices that you make. So, you know, again, it's an example of how it can enrich the learning.
Yeah. So this kind of follows on from that, doesn't it, really, this kind of difference in some of the intentions and how we communicate about different elements of the learning for PSHE and mindfulness.
Yeah, so well, it says it there really, the difference between how we learn about body and movement, and what the learning requirements are. And similarly with emotional well-being, so there's one statement, I think, in the PSHE programs of study about avoiding negative thinking, and we know that in mindfulness we notice and allow all our thoughts and acknowledge them, allow them, and making choices about how best to support ourselves, particularly if the thoughts are tricky. And another example is healthy eating. So you could look at the mindful mouthful lessons and say, here's an opportunity for linking with healthy eating. And again, what that really does is enriches and enlarges the learning around healthy eating, because if you just go for the pure requirements, they're around things like nutritional content of food and eating a balanced plate, etc. And what we'd encourage, and I would encourage in PSHE teaching as well, is it's much more about conditions for eating, when I eat, who I eat with, where I eat, what my eating habits are, what my eating choices are. And, you know, what the mindfulness can bring in there is a real sort of sensation, you know, using our senses around food and really tasting it and noticing it and, you know, taking time over it, and, you know, a much more richer approach, if you like, to healthy lifestyles and eating and exercise.
Yeah. I kind of noticed within myself a little bit of resistance to this idea of kind of, you know, the healthy choice is kind of this and you must do that, and the unhealthy choice is that and you can't do that. When actually within mindfulness, what we're trying to cultivate or encourage is that young people really listen to kind of almost their own wisdom in the moment. You know, what's right for me right now is what we're really sort of exploring together. Not that we're not necessarily educating them around those things, but there is the sense of, you know, for example, if you had a child who had experienced trauma and was in a challenging situation, if they chose to kind of run away in that situation, then that's perhaps the wisest choice for them in that moment. And so it feels to me a lot more nuanced than this kind of very straightforward kind of what's healthy and unhealthy. And I think what's really useful and helpful about mindfulness learning is that we explore that in a kind of more open way. And that can feed into really good PSHE teaching as well, is that same kind of open exploration of that.
Real key is looking at your learning intentions or objectives for any lesson, whether you're teaching mindfulness or PSHE or a combination of, just really thinking about what's the learning here, and could it be added to or rephrased in a slightly different way to meet both, maybe.
Yeah. So this is often talked about. It's kind of one of the things that, you know, really can broaden out how mindfulness can support whole school work. Is looking at how mindfulness can help with learning behaviours, and this is kind of where I think, well, you know, this is, you know, something that we have talked about for a long time, I think, within sort of mindfulness in schools, but definitely important to kind of just bring attention to, again, the fact that it's touched on there in the PSHE Association programmes of study, and that, you know, this is the way that, you know, kind of mindfulness learning can be applied across the school. So not just in PSHE or just in mindfulness, but, you know, sort of more broader sort of skill set or learning behaviours.
Yeah, only to add that the Cambridgeshire primary programme has units of work around this, but it isn't made explicit in the PSHE requirements. But there are, several PSHE programmes would include things like this, but I think mindfulness has a particular strength in kind of addressing them.
So coming on to whole school, I'm going to sort of flash all of these up together, I think. So as we said at the beginning, it needs to begin somewhere. Perhaps if you're introducing mindfulness in school, it might not be easy that the whole school has kind of bought into this idea of kind of having a whole school approach to SEL, health, education and wellbeing. So the recommendation would be that would be both programmes would work at their best if these things were in place. And you'd referred to this particular document, promoting children and young people's mental health and wellbeing, a whole school or college approach, which has got the 8 principles there, which give guidance about how that can be done across a kind of range of areas. Just going to see if I can name them. So the 8 principles refer to leadership and management, ethos and environment, curriculum, teaching and learning, student voice, staff development, health and wellbeing, identifying need and monitoring impact, working with parents, families and carers, and targeted support and appropriate referrals. So there is just this sense of kind of, can both of these curricular areas work to kind of support that or be an integral part of that?
We also, and in the introduction, we have listed, haven't we, a range of whole school programmes and initiatives that are around. And I think it's important to recognise the sort of risks of initiative overload. I'm sure lots of you who are in schools will sort of experience that there are a lot of programmes around in this area, and it's really important to select what's right for your school or your class or your children. But also, I kind of think mindfulness is, well, I would say this, wouldn't I, but not just another initiative. It kind of can underpin and support all of that. And it's about, because it's about a way of being and a practice as well as content kind of thing, it has a slightly different feel to it for me.
Okay, so this fantastic quote that's been taken from Implementing Mindfulness in Schools, which if you've not got a copy of and had a look at and explored and read, really recommend that you do that. It's on the Mindfulness Initiative's website. So through its present moment embodied skills-based approach, mindfulness can help ensure that the aims of SEL are realised in practice and action, not just expressed as theories, words and future intention. And so there is that something of moving from thinking about it into kind of like bringing it to life, applying it in life. I think is a kind of really valuable thing that mindfulness can do to support SEL and also PSHE. So just to say that I'm just going to show you kind of where the resources are on the website. You'll have probably seen our homepage, and the resources sit underneath the training and support header there. It's one on the drop-down menu. You'll see it's called Mapping Our Curricula. So you'll be able to see it there. See this wonderful session that you're part of right now. Underneath that, there is the guidance that you can kind of read directly on that landing page, or you can download it and print it off as a PDF. And you'll see kind of the buttons there at the bottom of this page, and each curricula has its own map. So PSHE is the one that we're going to have a little look at now. And so this is the kind of introduction to the map.
Yeah, so you get this front page on each map, if you like, and it explains, again, emphasising the importance of reading the introduction as much as you can first, and then explaining this colour coding for green for direct links and the purple for indirect links. And then you've got headings, the headings from the DFE statutory guidance and the PSHE Association Programmes of Study that are drawn into this, and the codings that are used. So those initials relate to those sections of the guidance. And then we've listed the core mechanisms from the Mindfulness Initiative, implementing mindfulness guidance, and they are also listed in the grids that you'll see shortly. Okay, so there it is with the headings. So the core mechanisms are listed first on the left that are kind of picked up in these lessons, and then you've got the lesson with its objectives or intentions down the left. The links are on the right, so the DFE statutory guidance with those kind of codes, and the PSHE Association Programmes of Study, which divides into 3 sections, are numbered, which is helpful, so they're quite easy to reference. Underneath the lesson objectives, I don't know if you, that doesn't show on the next slide, does it? Oh yeah, so you've also got the practices and the activities there. Okay, so the key practices and activities from that lesson. Just want to emphasize again the notes column and the opportunities column, because it sort of shows where there might be possibilities where you can link, but also sometimes explains the mindfulness learning in more detail, so that you can kind of see how to weave it in or how to weave it through. Okay, enough on that.
Yeah, I think that's the last slide actually. So one of the things to say is that you know, that was kind of the notes section was where it all began to come together for us. Really, it was just a sense of, well, how do we show how they could connect in practice in a lesson? And if you look at the notes, you'll see there's kind of like different possibilities for how you might do that, and in some cases a little bit more explanation of the learning in the lesson and how that would support some of the criteria that are kind of named on the right hand side. Okay, any more to say, Annabelle, or is that okay?
That covers it.
So thank you very much for listening to us while we took you through that.